So our next question is this. Basically the curves, and they show a 1 hour infusion and a 5 hour infusion. And the question says, explain the pharmacokinetics of the 25, 50, and 75% decrement times, and discuss the clinical application of these curves. So if you look at the curve, this is the time after cessation, and this is the concentration. So a 25% decrement time is where you look at 3. A 50% decrement time is where you look at 2. So there's a gap there, and then at 75% decrement time, you see it's a massive gap. So that's what the question asking, and then discuss the clinical applications of these curves. All right, this question just needs a bit of definitions at the start. So what you do is, after cessation of the propofol, basically TCI declines in an exponential fashion. So you put the equation, and then you explain that alpha, beta, gamma are slopes of a log transformed plasma versus time graph. Then you talk about alpha being a fast distribution, beta being a slow distribution, and gamma being a terminal elimination. And then at 25%, so they're the same, right? Why? So the first hour, it talks about the rapid distribution V1 to V2 and V1 to V3, which is quite less significant, and then you got clearance. So therefore similar plasma concentration. At 5 hours, they've already been saturated, so it's mainly the clearance and metabolism. And then at 50%, what you have is you basically have, it's a context sensitive halftime, and you basically talk about 1 hour being from V2 to V1, and so V2 back to V1 and V1 to V3 and plus clearance. In the 5 hour, it's basically V5 to V2 to V1 and V3 to V1 and clearance, because it's already been saturated. So in a long infusion, it will be greater as the compartments have been saturated with a long infusion, right? So you're basically putting more out in V1, so the V1 compartment is greater. And then at 75% decrement time, it's even greater. So again, it's V2 to V1, so they're both the same, but it's even longer because due to the larger V3 storage, means longer time, the redistribution exponentially slower for a 5-hour infusion. Overall, the main component for prolonged infusion is the V3. So basically what it's saying is that V3 has had longer time to equilibrate. And so so what we basically say is that because the time has increased, the V3 has now become larger. So V1 goes to V2, then V1 goes to V3. Over time, so you're having more V1 than going to V2, V3, so basically the V3 storage has become larger. So for it to be redistributed, it takes forever. And then the second part, you talk about the CP50 for awakening is 1.5 mics per mil. Now remember, the CP50 for sleeping is what? 2.5, okay? But the CP50 for awakening is the 1.5, which is the plasma concentration required to achieve a specific effect in 50% of the patient. Now CE lags behind, so they might be a bit lower, which is 1.2, assuming that CP equals CE. Not accurate with synergistic drugs, not completely accurate. So the part of the question here is like, what's the clinical relevance, right? So it's not accurate and not completely accurate with PD effects of individuality, example LD. And basically it explains or models the lag between the CP and CE, so can lower target CP at the end of the case to speed up emergence, and TCI is mathematically derived, which is represented in, not representing in vivo. So it's a mathematically derived thing in the lab, so that's important to know. So just to make it extremely clear, these two look the same, right? So you're like, oh wait, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that basically the peripheral compartments contain more drug because you had more time for it to be delivered. And then the other thing I want to think, the conclusion is basically half-lives don't predict our wake-up times, but decrement times are more clinically relevant because they show you basically where the CP50 is, and so on. Um, also explains the lag and the fact that the TCI is mathematically calculated, so it's not in vivo.